Kuna Lihelijati, Ayana Wehali-Akta Unega Dagodoa. Greetings, I am Ayana Wehali-Akta Unega, and this is the White Female Support System Correction number 7, and I will be reading an excerpt of Chief Nanya Shaabu Eil of the Atsakara Nation of Yamasee Moors' response to the United Nations Questionnaire from the UN Independent Export on the Promotion of a Democratic and Equitable International Order on the impact of economic and financial policies, especially those of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, on a democratic and equitable international order. Our assessment of the IMF and the World Bank collaboration with the United Nations is nothing short of genocide, infanticide, apartheid, crimes against humanity, war crimes, etc., for operating contrary to the United Nations Charter and international law. The actions of the IMF and the World Bank, as well as the United Nations, is apparent and obvious as being the source of the very problems they claim they are seeking to solve. The IMF and the World Bank, as well as the United Nations, who fronts for the Rothschilds, are conspirators, collaborators, colluders, and accessories to genocide, infanticide, rape, forced assimilation, fratricide, apartheid, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and all other international law, treaties, and conventions that they signed in support of. The IMF and the World Bank, as well as the United Nations, who fronts for the Rothschilds, are guilty of violating all the laws, treaties, and conventions of the United Nations and international law, as proven by the following evidence. We economic hitmen have really been the ones responsible for this first truly global empire, and we work many different ways. But perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources that our corporations covet, like oil, then arrange a huge loan for that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, power plants, industrial parks, ports, things which benefit a few rich people in that country, in addition to our corporations, but don't really help the majority of people at all. However, those people, the whole country, is left holding huge debt. It's such a big debt they can't repay it. And that's from the plan, if they can't repay it. And so at some point, the economic hitmen go back to them and say, listen, you owe us a lot of money, can't pay your debt, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Allow us to build a military base in your country or send troops in support of ours to some place in the world like Iraq, or vote with us on the next UN vote to have their electric utility company privatized and their water and sewage system privatized. That's sold to U.S. corporations or other multinational corporations. So that it's a whole mushrooming thing, and it's so typical of the IMF and the World Bank work. They just put a country in debt. It's such a big debt they can't pay it, and then you offer to refinance that debt and pay even more interest, and you demand this quid pro quo, which you call a conditionality or a good governance, which means basically they got to sell off their resources, including many of their social services, their utility companies, their school systems, sometimes their penal systems, their insurance systems to foreign corporations. So it's a double, triple, quadruple whammy. And this is a quote from John Perkins, who is the former chief economist for Chas T. Main Incorporated, also the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. There are two ways to conquer and enslave a nation. One is by the sword, the other is by debt. And that is a quote from John Adams, years 1735 to 1826. The IMF, the World Bank, and the United Nations, under the hand of the Rothschilds banking cartel, are guilty, active actors, willing participants, aiders, abettors, and accessories of global slavery. This does not apply to Black African American, African Canadians, Afro-Caribbeans, or Afro-Latinos, etc., because the aforementioned categories have no standing at law, domestically and internationally, and it is not recognized in law. Civiliter mortus, civilly dead, dead in the view of the law. Black or African American, African Canadians, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, etc., are not entitled to human rights, indigenous rights, or any kind of rights. The IMF, the World Bank, and the United Nations knows this international legal fact. The IMF, the World Bank, and the United Nations, under the hand of the Rothschilds banking cartel, are guilty of genocide, apartheid, fratricide, infanticide, trafficking in human cargo, human rights violations, crimes against humanity, rape, forced assimilation, and war crimes against the entire planet of indigenous and autochthonous peoples. People who are persons, individuals, and corporations are artificial or fictions, also known as fictions of law. This means they do not exist. Those who are artificial or fictions of law, operating as a corporation with benefits from corporations and not distinguishing corporate existence from natural, flesh and blood existence, are indeed property of the Vatican or the Holy See, the Jesuits, the Rothschilds' central bank system, those central banks connected to it, IMF, World Bank, and as such, no crimes or violations of international law apply to persons, individuals, and corporations, because the aforementioned are considered artificial and do not exist. Once again, this has been an excerpt of Chief Nanya Shaabu Eil of the Autochthon Nation of Yamasee Moors, response to the United Nations Questionnaire. And this is the White-Female Support System Correction number 7. Abigadur, Abigadur, Abigadur.